In this lesson, we'll be talking about what you should know. These are the skills or knowledge that you should have before jumping into trying to learn more about computer forensics. Operating systems. You'll need to know some basics of system administration. So you'll have to have a basic understanding of the various administrative tools and how to use them. You'll also need the ability to use command line tools on Windows. A good understanding of how Windows actually works and the structure of how it's laid out on the disk and where it stores data. That's also really useful to have, although, again, some of the tools that you'll be using will help to be able to find information for you, but being able to understand where all of that data is, or knowing where all of that data is and how it relates to the operation of Windows, is really helpful as you go through learning more about computer forensics. Unix-like operating systems, so Linux or Mac OS or OpenBSD or FreeBSD, anything that has a Unix foundation. You need to know command line tools like DD, fscheck, file, and a variety of others. You need to be comfortable with using command line tools and knowing how they work and how to operate them. At a minimum, you need to be able to know how to figure out how to use the different systems. So you'll need to know how to use Google and man pages on the system to be able to figure out how these different tools work when you have the need to use them. You'll also need to be able to do just basic things and understand the basic utilities of Unix and know how to do things like find files and change into different directories and being able to display folders and files and find out information about the folders and the files and the different permissions that are there. So you need to understand that sort of thing from a Unix-like operating system perspective. And again, the same thing with Windows, understanding how the system starts up and where all of the system files are stored and how they relate to one another, the different mount points and partition types that there are, different file systems, all of those things are really helpful to understand as you start looking more into computer forensics. Speaking of file systems, understanding at least a little bit about the different FAT file systems, whether it's FAT16 or FAT32 and the differences that are there, NTFS, and those are Microsoft related or Windows related file systems, both FAT and NTFS. From a Unix perspective, you've got UFS, you've got the ext-based file systems like ext2, ext3, ext4. There are a number of others like JFS or XFS or RicerFS. There are a number of Unix-related file systems, and at least having some familiarity with what they are, whether they're journaled or not, and how they operate, that's really helpful to know. You should understand disk partitioning, and primarily what you'll run across is PC-based disks, and so you'll need to know what the master boot record is, what is stored in the master boot record. You'll need to understand the difference between physical partitions and logical partitions, for example. The number of physical partitions that are allowed and the number of logical partitions that are allowed, and what happens to a disk and its partition map when you add a logical partition. What does all of that look like? And how does that relate to the storage of data and where drives and mount points can be found, depending on whether you're talking about Windows or a Unix-like operating system? You should understand networking, at a minimum, TCP/IP basics. You should understand how to do packet captures and have a decent idea, at least, how to look at a packet capture. You should have a basic understanding of sockets. What does a socket mean, and how does a socket work in terms of systems communicating with one another? And how would you go about taking a look at the sockets that are on a system and what they are doing? All of those really useful skills to have at a minimum as we're going into understanding what computer forensics is and what forensic investigators do. You should have a basic understanding of memory management. What does a memory layout for a program look like? How does an operating system allocate memory? So what's a stack and what's a heap, and what gets allocated when a program runs? You should also understand a bit about virtual memory. What is virtual memory? Where is it stored? What gets stored in virtual memory? Why is it useful to know what's in virtual memory? Be talking more about those sorts of things in more detail later on. So in conclusion, you should understand some basics of operating systems, including Windows and Unix-like operating systems. You should understand file systems at a basic level, know what disk partitioning looks like and where partition tables are stored and how those get altered. You should understand some basics of networking, certainly TCP/IP. Additional networking protocols are certainly helpful, but TCP/IP is just one of the foundations. And you should have some basic understanding of memory management. So all of those are the sorts of knowledge and skills that you should have as we continue deeper into this investigation into computer forensics.